Well, here we are. It's a beautiful midwinter's day, actually quite warm, and I'm down at my secret location working on the car again. So here we go, let's go and see where we're up to. So I got myself a hard top in the meantime. Very lucky to get the exact colour match from a guy down the other end of the country in Christchurch. I've got my dash cluster is in the car at the moment, but just temporarily, all the wires still got a bit of wiring off to do there, and that'll be something I hopefully get to do today. And down here, I know it looks a bit messy, but we know exactly what's going on down here. So I've got the two controllers just sitting in location at the moment. And what I've done is I've gone and sort of split everything out into functions, if you want to call it that. So up here we've got the CAN bus connection off to the other controller. These three wires here are the blue for the contactor, the pre-charge, and the earth for the contactor, so they're sort of run off on their own. We've got the link to the, I think that goes to the motor, that one, for the temperature and tach feedback. This is the main one. This is the one that does all the business. So this goes to multiple different connections, and if I follow that back all the way around here, I've been wiring off a junction box, and so that sort of commons all of these wires to their appropriate links. Now I've got a wiring schematic here from the HPEVS system, and you see I've laminated up so I don't destroy it. And so you can see here what I've replicated in the box is basically all these little links here. So we've got the purple and the brown being the clutch switch. Fortunately enough, this car already has a clutch switch, even though it's not actually used in my original vehicle. The green goes to the pedal interlock, which is a wire I haven't shown you. I'll move over to that in a minute. Purple is the economy mode, so that's running off up to the front. Again, the red blue red, that's going to go up to the front of the car as well. Eventually we have the white, which is the enable for forward. That's permanently linked here. We've got the gearbox, so no need to switch forwards reverse with the car. So what we're going back over here, the yellow wire was the reverse input, but I've got that going to go up to the front of the car. A couple of pins in this block aren't populated, so I don't need the reverse input, but what's missing from this harness connection here is the pin 2 tacho output. So I will swap this cable for pin 2 and use that to go and drive the tach. So as I was saying before, there's the purple and the brown coming back. Then I have another set of cables going off up to the throttle, and what I've got here is the three throttle wipers, high, low, and wiper, and then I have a couple of wires that go to the throttle microswitch. Just bear with me a second, I'll pan over here and we'll have a look at that. That's here in my toolbox. And so I've wired 3 wires to the microswitch, normally open, normally closed, and COM. And they go from the microswitch, link up with the throttle pot like I showed you, and I've wired that off to a 6-pin Deutsch socket and plug, which is ready to be populated with the wires I just showed you. So that's all good. So I've also run off on the secondary controller. I've also tidied up everything, so I've got the link to the other controller and the motor inputs, or outputs I should say. Linked off all the wires for the spyglass, so there's the Curtis connector and the plus and minus, if you want to call them that, for the push button. And over here are the wires for the contactor and pre-charge. So I've done pretty much the same thing, run off the spyglass and the push button, and I'm picking up the blue-red for that later. I know it all looks a bit messy right now, but don't worry about it. I know what I'm doing. I'm a professional. So what else have I got here? Here is basically the positive, negative, and vacuum switch for the vacuum pump system. Just having a vacuum line made up for that now, so that'll be a custom plug-in for that. That'll tidy everything up there. I think I showed you that in the last video. Yeah, DC to DC converter. It's a Meanwell HLG 600H 15A, so that means 15 volts adjustable. So I get that down to like 13.8 or whatever is appropriate for the lead acid battery, which the car still has. That is required for New Zealand regulations to maintain hazards and wipers and lights in case of a traction pack failure, so we just keep the standard 12 volt system intact. And I'll be attaching that to what used to be the alternator connection. Had a little bit of fun and games with some contactors over here. Not contactors, relays. You sort of forget what things were from one month to the next on a long project like this. So turns out 2 of them are actually for the headlights, but the third one is the one I wanted, and the earth for that no longer worked because that went to the engine computer. So I have wired a new earth for that, which I'll tidy up a little later, and that activates what used to be a connection for the front cooling fans. Now that's a lovely fused relayed power supply, obviously for the 12 volt high on the controllers. So it's getting there, it's looking pretty good, and I'm just gonna wire off one wire at a time and I'll get there. So one other thing was my hang on a moment, I'll find out where I put it. And I'm back. This is what I was looking for. I have made up a little box for the 2 Curtis spyglasses and the 2 push buttons, and I'm just gonna wire that out to a socket or flying lead over here, and I'm going to keep these gauges separate. I'm not going to use them in the car at all, but I would like to retain the ability to use the gauges and the spyglasses, and that means being able to program the car as well. So what I'm going to do is get this one here is about the right length, so I'll just leave this here in the engine bay, and maybe I can wire these 2 leads off to another 2 pins in here. These are the standard computer style Molex, which I happen to have the pins and connectors and tools all for. So you can readily buy these at well, we call it Element 14, JCar, RS Components, whatever you call it in your country. So there we go. There's a 4-pin version. I've got 10 pins, I think that is, or is it 12? Either. So you can buy these for like $1. And one of the easiest ways of wiring these up is to get a motherboard jumper, a male to female 24-pin jumper. It's about 10 inches long, and if you've got the special little tool, which this doesn't come cheap, I might say, but considering it's only like a miniature little tuning fork, this thing gets the pins out of those things, no worries. Well worth having. And you end up with wires with the pins and sockets already crimped on either end, multiple different colors, and you're away. So yes, that's a job for today, is to finish up this box and to shorten up these two cables so they, or this one, so that it comes in about the same place as this one, and that will be, if you want to call it that, an engine diagnostics port. And if I make myself a nice little lead, I can sit in the passenger cabin with my box plugged in, or I can just come straight to the car and tweak with the controllers right here in the engine bay. So I think that's looking promising. Obviously the goal is to get a motor spin on video before I leave for EVCon, but unfortunately for me, I leave like 3 weeks beforehand, and I've got a week in Australia for a CAD conference in a couple of weeks' time as well. So time is short, and resources are limited, namely me. And so the wiring continues. So here's the, if you want to call it, controller box, or programming box I made up earlier. I've gone ahead and put the lead on, and I have a 12-pin Deutsch connector on the end of that. So that's just going to be a walk up to the car, plug it in, and play. So to match that, I've got the 12-pin socket, and that's going to go on to each of the spyglass wiring cable sets. So the 4 pins I've taken out of the Molex connector, and then the appropriate switching for the push button, and the same for the primary controller. So just going to go ahead and wire those off into that Molex, into that Deutsch connector. I do actually have the Curtis controller software programming system with the USB dongle. So if I want to use that for direct programming instead of using the push buttons, I've made myself an adapter cable here, so that'll go into the same socket, and it has a primary and a secondary controller connection there. So I just got to mark them off, which one's which. So that's good, and we'll have pretty much what you might call a programming port on the car. So this has a removable dovetail slide here, and perhaps I don't know, we'll figure it out later, but bolted onto the front member here, and see if I can find a rubber cap to keep the moisture out of that when I'm not using it. So the wiring up front is steadily getting a bit tidier. I know it doesn't actually look it, but it is. We're getting a semblance of order here. So we've got all of the pins temporarily wired. Well, I got socketed. I haven't got the actual other half connector wired in yet, but I've got all the pins connected there for the throttle. so I can test, make sure I've got all the pins in the right place, and then socket them off when it's all good. The junction box I showed you earlier, a few wires going off to the front. Temporarily conduited that so they're all tidy and don't confuse me. We've got the CAN bus connected to the secondary controller, and we've got another one here which I need to take that off to the front for the dash driving cluster. So I have a mating plug here in my hot hand, and I just have to wire that off. So I've made myself a bit of twisted pair. We have the pins ready to go, the socket there, trusty crimpers, and yes, I'll just wire that off. And sorry, I've got to do this all two-handed, so I'm going to have to cancel the filming for a while. I'll show you what that looks like. And there we have it, another 12 wires finished off, plugged into my, well, I'm calling it my programming box up there. Yes, a blue-white twisted pair. That's the CAN bus running up to the front, ready for running the instrument cluster. And here is I made up another adapter, 12-pin Deutsch to 2 of the Molex plugs, so that can program the primary and secondary controller when I put that plug in that socket. So how many more wires to go? Oh, I couldn't count. I'll just keep going. So there we go, 12 volt to the controllers, just temporarily hooked up at the moment, so that's fed from what used to be the front cooling fan supply. That's a switch 12 volt, and as you can see I've got my Curtis programming software plugged in, and looks like I've got my connections around the right way. So on my split adapter there, I've got the plugs in the right pins, and I've got it plugged into the correct adapter. So I've got a black and a white tape. White is right, so black is left, and it's all working great. Just setting up a few parameters, throttle deadband, acceleration rate, all that sort of stuff, and not far to go now. Just got to get a few more wires tapped off, and maybe I'll throw some batteries up the front there and we can get this thing going. Looking forward to it.